Welcome back. Data download time. It's been called the nation's longest war. And more than 5 decades in, many Americans are wondering, what have they gotten out of the time and money spent on the so-called war on drugs? But different measures suggest that those policies have had limited success, if you can call it that, and have produced, at best, uneven impacts across the country. So let's start with the basics. The war on drugs has not only been long, 52 years, it has been expensive, $39 billion. Last year, how about this? We have spent in the 52 years over $1 trillion since we launched this so-called war on drugs in 1971. And despite throwing all that money at it, the problem remains. In the 80s, we were talking about cocaine and crack cocaine. In the last few years, it's opioids that have become the key driver to drug overdoses, with synthetic opioids like fentanyl the chief culprit, as you can see here. And we showed this graph at the top of the show. The opioid deaths were 8.5 times higher in 2020 than in 1999. And synthetic opioids have been driving that spike much more than commonly prescribed opioids or even heroin. But just like in the 80s and 90s, not all Americans are being impacted equally. In 2018, as you can see here, white Americans actually had a higher opioid overdose death rate than the nation, 18.8 per 100,000 in the population versus 14.6 for Americans overall and 14.1 for black Americans, according to the CDC. But look at this. In just the last 3 years, the rate for black Americans has skyrocketed, more than doubled to 33.5 per 100,000 in the population. The figure for white Americans has also climbed to 28.4 per 100,000. The overall figure also has climbed to 24.7 per 100,000. But these numbers for black Americans obviously stand apart. And guess what? At the same time, the number of convictions for fentanyl trafficking has gone way up. More than 450% from 422 offenders in 2018 to more than 2,300 last year. And once again, it is black Americans being hit the hardest. Let me show you this. Black offenders make up the largest share of fentanyl convictions. According to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, about 41% of offenders were black, 39% were Hispanic. Whites made up a much smaller portion of fentanyl convictions at about 19%. So in other words, despite 50-plus years of action, drug overdoses, over convictions, largely due to fentanyl, and black Americans are bearing the brunt of this crisis now on both ends, addiction and incarceration.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.